grateful for the invitation. I have to say I'm always humbled by the meetings like this and the work that you sufferers do, putting in to advocate for each other and yourself. And I think it puts a large part of the medical profession to shame, for which I apologise. I'd like to thank David for his persistence and diligence in pursuing scientific rectitude, and also like to thank Willie very much, who has a main role in preserving my sanity, because I don't have many paediatrician colleagues who I can relate to, but Willie and I can bring each other over each bit of madness, and he supports me with adolescent patients, and I'm always pleased to know that my patients can go on and see him when they become adults, and it's nice to have such an ally. Thanks. I'm always struck that I have to know my audience, but I've got a pretty good idea of my audience here. But once I had to give a lecture, and I found I brought all the long slides, and I had to talk for 2 hours. So in desperation I said, let's have questions at the beginning. And 45 minutes later the dust settled. And I know you often kind of sit throughout a talk and then want to get a question at the end, and there isn't time. So I'm very happy to have any burning questions at the beginning. I may not answer them properly, but be thinking about any questions you want, and also feel free to interrupt and protest and do what you want throughout this talk. Any big questions at the moment that you want to ask in 40 minutes' time? No? That's okay then. Oh, yes. Yes.
I'm a long-suffering ME person, 35 years.
Nice and loud.
Sorry, 35 years.
Yes.
Yeah. I want to know the stiffness of the muscles and the weakness of the muscles, which actually gets worse. Is that usual, or may it move on to something else?
So you heard the question was about whether sometimes if you have very stiff muscles and weakness, whether it's all ME or whether it could be something else. That's a very important point, because having ME does not protect you from developing anything else. I had one patient who developed rheumatoid arthritis after she developed ME, so you can get other things. There's one actual condition which is worth knowing about, which causes painful stiff muscles, especially in the shoulder and limb girdles, and it's treatable, and it's called polymyalgia rheumatica, and the treatment is steroids, and they're magic. So if you're feeling that sort of way, just drop those words into the GP, and he said, oh, well maybe, and he might do a blood test, and he might do a trial of steroids.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you very much.
Okay. This is a PowerPoint which I actually did as a talk to GPs many years ago. It's quite old, but it just covers some of the main principles. So we'll go through it. Again, before we start, I'd like to thank Joan for the opportunity to see all those lovely families I saw today. It's really a pleasure to see them again. I love patient contact, and it reminded me of a question which maybe you can help me with the answer. A man once did a charity bike ride from Land's End to John O'Groats, and he chose ME as a charity. And the charity gave him ME families to stay with all the way up England and Scotland. And as he handed over the £10,000 cheque to the charity at the end, he said, there's one thing about this condition I don't understand. Does it affect nice people? Or can it affect anyone and then it turns them nice? I think there's a truth there. There's certain sort of people, David has mentioned some of them already, who never seem to develop ME, and all the nice people do. I don't know the answer to that question. I'll take you through a little bit of my own personal story, how I became interested in ME and what happened subsequently. Very much like my tutor, Alan Franklin, in the mid-80s, we were both confronted by a girl in a wheelchair who announced that she had ME in my clinic. Neither of us had heard of it before. It all seemed very genuine. My patient described how she tried to go to school Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then be flaked out till the next week, and it just struck me as genuine. So A bit like the boy who saw the emperor prancing around in a nude, I went around asking people questions. And eventually I was quite early convinced that ME is a genuine psychological illness. So can we just have the next slide, please? No, next. Anyway,
it's changing on the screen, but no.
anyway, once you, as you know, once you say that you believe in ME, everyone comes to you, don't you? You know the cartoon of the GP's waiting room, which is full of anxious ME patients, and the nervous spokesman says to the receptionist, "We've heard a rumour that one of the GPs here is nice to people with ME." And the word got around that I was interested in ME, and they started flooding to me from across the northern region. So I didn't want to see them all, so I sent a questionnaire to all the paediatricians in the northern region of England, and I asked them, could we actually go forward a bit, and then, yeah, let's skip this one. Skip. And this is the controversy about etiology. Next.
Nigel, you stay in front of the screen, please?
Yes.
Yes, anywhere there.
And
Thank you.
this is the position, what I call position A. That ME is primarily an organic process which can occur in individuals who are at least initially psychologically normal, and this is perfectly compatible with a holistic approach or secondary psychological problems or being depressed because you've had ME for years, and I personally believe in position A. Then there's position B, that is primarily psychological psychosomatic with no organic basis. Now the enemy never actually say it, do they? But that's what they really believe. And they call it CFS rather than ME because that's weaker, and then they miss the syndrome off and it's unexplained fatigue. But that is the heresy of the atheist. And give me long enough and I'll find a psychological problem. And position C is the establishment fence-sitters hypothesis. Oh, you need a bit of both. It's absolutely rubbish. There's no condition in the world where you have to have both. But that is a kind of orthodoxy about it. I gave a lecture to British paediatricians in Cambridge once, and we had a show of hands, and we won for position A, just with kind of 52 to 45 against position C. Anyway, I sent this round to my colleagues in the northern region, asking them to tick a box. And I was really heartened that a lot of the general paediatricians working in district general hospitals throughout the north of England, good old-fashioned paediatricians who knew how to take histories, they replied 17 to 9, position A. In other words, it's a physical illness. And that empowered me, and I was able to direct people to other paediatricians so they didn't all have to come and see me. Then, emboldened by this, I sent the same questionnaire to all the child psychiatrists in the northern region. Surprisingly, they sent back the questionnaires without any boxes ticked. They refused to tick a box. And then they wrote me long essays reproving me, saying that these questions were quite improper, and hadn't I heard about the mind-body continuum? I mean, what can you do with people like that? They will not tick a box. They're really a mixture of B and C. Okay, next please. I always find the evidence from children is so striking when you see a child coming down with ME out of the blue with no psychological trauma whatsoever. You just believe in it. I was once talking to an adult neurologist who, like most adult neurologists, doesn't believe in it. And he said, "Oh, does ME occur in children? Maybe I'll have to think again." And that was an honest opening of the mind. Just go back a bit, sorry. And I was on the CMO's report, and we thought in 2002 that we'd won with the CMO's report, didn't we? That was marvellous. But of course, the battle goes like that over the years, and people make comebacks. Right, next please. There's nothing to beat taking a careful clinical history. anyone who takes a careful history has to believe in ME. But apart from that, I think apart from making the diagnosis, it's really important for the doctor-patient relationship, because it validates the patient. The doctor is interested in each of those symptoms. And so it's part of the beginning of a long-term relationship. Next, please. And the management of ME should just be the same for any other nasty, chronic, disabling condition. And as you know, it's not being managed very well by our profession at the moment. We all know there isn't a cure, and I think it's worth actually starting from therapeutic nihilism, because the trouble is, after the CMO's report, they had treatment centres, and the treatment centres have to offer you something, so they offer you CBT and GET. But let's not talk of treatment, let's talk of management. And this is what I say for paediatric ME, because validation, you've taken the history, you've taken them seriously, you've given them a nice, strong label, and even today, one or two of my patients were saying, thank God someone's got off the fence and said what it is. I once saw a girl at an ME conference in a wheelchair, sobbing. I'm talking about the importance of validation. And I asked her mother, what's the matter, who's upset her? She said, no, leave her alone. Those are cries of joy. Those are cries of happiness. She'd just heard David Bell give a lecture, and she realised there's one doctor in the world who understands what's been affecting her for the last 3 years. So just getting the diagnosis and getting the validation and the belief and the explanation that it's not something worse, but at least it makes sense, is important. Ideally, sympathy should be prescribable on the NHS. I sometimes feel like writing a prescription saying have some sympathy. Rather cowardly, I talk of the dangers of compassion fatigue, which Bob Geldof popularised, and I think empathy takes more out of doctors. A famous professor once said, no paediatrician should have more than 4 patients with ME, because it sucks it out of you, but you can support much bigger numbers. And I've seen 700 children with ME over the last 30 years. And support, I was talking to GPs a year ago, there's a lot you can do to support people. Half the reason doctors run away from ME and discharge you and don't give you follow-up appointments and send you to physiotherapists and psychiatrists is they don't realise they can really help patients. And we'll talk about support. And a child who does not have a diagnosis of ME, is not protected by that diagnosis, is at risk until stated otherwise. I've just had to defend a mother in Scotland from prosecution for her son's non-school attendance. And he's virtually housebound and bedridden, but her local paediatrician calls it unexplained fatigue, no organic cause found. So he's left the child and the mother unprotected. Then there's quite a bit you all know about the things doctors can do with actual symptomatic treatment, and amitriptyline and melatonin and gabapentin and things like that. Advice is quite important, very important in the early stages. Time after time we hear the horror story of the person who doesn't realise they've got it, and they push themselves and keep going to the gym for 3 years before they make themselves worse. And this was written a long time ago, that the jury's out on CBT and GET, but that's just being modest, and I think we can say the jury is finished with CBT and GET. So in America they've now consigned it to the dustbin of history. Next, please. Okay, next, please. I actually have to spend my time sending letters to give extra allowances in exam boards and universities in other parts of the country, because the local paediatrician refuses to do it. So I do it as the head of a charity, and I write a general sort of letter. I believe this child has got ME, it would be appropriate, and it makes a hell of a difference. And even if you follow them on and they go to university, you give letters for them to have a ground floor flat in a tower block. You all know about benefits, and a paediatrician who supports his patients through the benefit system is worth his weight in gold. And then advice on management, you all know that. Next, please. there's this, it seems to be worse in England than here, although there are one or two families suffering with education here. But in England it's really pernicious, because Ofsted seems to regard all school non-attendance as evil, and they don't seem to recognise ME as a reason for it. And you all know that Jane Colby and Betty Dowd which showed that ME is the largest cumulative cause of school loss in Britain. It's not surprising because kids miss 2 or 3 years just like that. Sorry, back.
I'm sorry.
So there's pressure in the educational system. I once had a boy who could only manage Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then crashed out for 5 days. So I suggested he went Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and I had an angry head teacher on the line telling me, didn't I realise there's a legal requirement to attend school 100%. So I complained to her board of governors, who wrote that she was on a steep learning curve. But basically, half the time children are doing too much because of the pressure within themselves, from their parents, their grandparents, and the schools. And this is what I've actually spent the last 20 years doing. I've got 50 families, real hard cases, every one referred to a full case conference and threatened with child protection proceedings. And I've been on both sides of the fence with child protection. I've been to a lot of real abuse. I've helped to rescue a lot of children with real physical and emotional abuse. But to see innocent families subjected to this machinery is horrible. And once you load the gun and set this juggernaut sailing, it is very difficult to turn around. So I've been to case conferences where I've argued my case, I've put in my medical reports. And the last 2 I've been to, I was outvoted 16-1. Everyone voted the party line. Police, health visitor, school nurse, they were just all voted the same way. They put the child on the protection register, subject the family to a child protection plan for non-existent abuse, subject the child to fortnightly visits from the social worker, which don't happen because they're not really serious, and they take the child off the child protection register 2 years later and chalk it up as a cure. It's a horrible machinery when you see it. And at these voting things, about 80% of the people voting have never met the child or family. They're all sort of institutionalised people working within child protection. And the word disbelief is just the core thing that we all suffer from. And there's sometimes another family member, an aunt who's a teacher, or a cousin who's a nurse, and I've seen families reported to social services by family members, vicious ex-husbands, saying the child should be taken into care of. The mother, he doesn't want the child doesn't want to see him. But when there's divided families, it makes it very, very difficult. There's a new threat. We think things should be getting better. If you watched, there was a debate in the British Parliament led by Carol Monaghan, the MP for Glasgow, which really put this issue on the agenda. And yet, despite that, it's getting worse. And I've had 50 families over 20 years, but 18 of them have been in the last 5 years. And this is because there's now a growth industry of what used to be called Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Now, Munchausen syndrome by proxy was real. It was also as rare as hen's teeth. But Britain specialises in changing names, like ME to chronic fatigue syndrome. And they've now changed it to fabricated and induced illness. And now they've changed it, they've put it under a bigger umbrella as medically unexplained symptoms and perplexing presentations. And I was speaking to a community paediatrician in a region recently, and she said she had 130 families on her books as possible fabricated illness. And she was warning me about a child I was about to see who turned out to have undiagnosed ME. And of course, ME parents without a diagnosis are doing all the things that fabricated parents do. They are demanding second opinions, criticising the doctors, complaining, changing their stories. And that's just the normal reaction of a caring parent looking for a diagnosis. So watch out for perplexing presentations, medically unexplained symptoms, and in neurology now, adult and child neurology have invented a new thing called functional neurological disorders. And if they don't want to know about it, it's functional. Okay. I've always said using the term ME is highly preferred by you all because you know the reason. And I told these GPs, if you want to endear yourself to your families, call it ME rather than CFS. You all know the famous saying that abolishing the term ME, replacing it with CFS, is as unhelpful to the patient community as it would be to abolish the term Alzheimer's disease and replace it with chronic forgetfulness syndrome. Because we're all a bit forgetful sometimes, aren't we? It diminishes it and ridicules it. Okay, next. Surprising how many patients with ME have a past history of migraine before they developed ME. A lot of my ME children I had met previously with abdominal migraine or something else. And in the study I did, 60% of children had a diagnosis of migraine in addition to ME. And also 60% had a family history of migraine. So if you can find out that some of the headaches are migrainous, they're episodic, one-sided throbbing, and treat them with diet and Sanamigrone, you can help the headaches quite a lot and make the ME a tiny bit more tolerable. And then usual drugs and amitriptyline for pain as well. And quite interestingly, as you know with the brain fog, some people have a sort of acquired ADHD where they can't concentrate and their mind goes and they can't finish their exams and their essays. And sometimes I've tried Ritalin as if they had real ADHD. Sometimes I've persuaded myself they had ADHD before the ME, so I've got an excuse. But it can make quite a difference. And I know Alan Franklin used quite a bit of Ritalin for brain fog. Next. I've always noticed that teenage boys make very bad ME patients as a whole. They're heavily into denial and boom and bust and not wanting to know and not wanting to join groups and not wanting to have 10 friends. Some of them are quite good patients, but in general, they're quite difficult for their families. This is, all these things have been said by GPs. We don't believe in ME in this practice. I'll tell you about a GP in the southwest who rang a helpline. You're all hearing me all right? Is it just happening?
Yeah.
Right, man. He rang this helpline saying, I'm really worried, I think I've got ME. And the advisor said, oh yeah, I'm sorry if you have, but what's the big worry about it? He said, you don't realise it's always been a definite policy in our practice to treat every patient with ME with sustained hostility, ridicule and rejection. And I daren't tell my colleagues. So I'm going to take early retirement and tell them I'm suffering from depression, which is supposed to have less stigma. Now, he couldn't even tell his colleagues, and he'd been part of that process. Children don't get ME. We had one of those today. Oh yes, they do. Too young to have ME. The youngest I've seen probably developed it at the age of 2. He was a very happy, active toddler who had a virus and had run out of steam. When I saw him at 14, he had ME. This is very common in GPs. Don't believe in labelling things. We used not to label asthma, so children died untreated. You have to label things if you want to get support. And the word ME leads to support and charities and disability benefits and everything. Don't like making the diagnosis if there isn't a treatment. That is a real problem for doctors. They like to feel they've got treatment, but it doesn't stop us diagnosing lots of other very horrible conditions for which we don't have treatment. You can't, this is from a famous professor who edited an influential pediatric textbook which put chronic fatigue syndrome in the section on adolescent psychiatric problems and called it the composite somatization disorder of adolescence. In other words, it wasn't real. And this professor told a 6-year-old girl, "You can't have anything wrong with you, as all your tests are normal." And the 6-year-old was very bright, said, "Perhaps I've got a condition for which you haven't yet invented the right test." I think you agree that was game, set and match to the 6-year-old. How are we doing for time? Where's Joan gone?
5 to 9.
5 to 9.
I'll keep going until someone stops me. Joan will come back and stop me, won't she? I had finally a student sitting in my clinic, and they used to come to me for a month, and I had a lot of ME patients in my clinic, so I thought this was a good teaching opportunity. I said, while you're with me for this month, I'd like to convince you that ME is a genuine organic condition. He said, "You don't need to tell me, I've had it." I said, "Goodness me, tell me your story." He said, "Well, I was up at Oxford doing PPE at the end of the first summer. I came down with the virus, never got back to college. After 9 months of being housebound, my friendly GP sent me to the local physician at the district general hospital. And I thought I was going to get someone to take a good look at me, take a history, do some tests, give me a diagnosis. The consultant physician looked at the GP's letter, asked the nurse to leave the room, just one-to-one, didn't take a history, didn't examine him, didn't do any tests, and proceeded to tear a strip off him and said if he hadn't the guts to complete a university degree in these days of high unemployment, he should make way for better people." And as that boy limped back to his house, white and pale, he said, "I could be a better doctor than him." And he took up medicine. Next, please. I've always said that ME drives doctors mad. If it doesn't, and they've tolerated a moderate and mild and moderate case, they can be quite happy with that. But if they become severe, then the doctors go mad. And tolerating a severe case of ME is very, very difficult. Everyone goes mad. The teachers say they're missing out on their education, they're missing out on socialisation. And it's very challenging to look after them, but we'll leave that to GPs who have to come on next. Interestingly, of my 7 severe cases, 4 made near complete recoveries. And the interesting thing is they had received immunoglobulin. And I started using this after a GP with an interest cured one of my patients without telling me. And I was quite pleased because he did brilliantly. So I offered immunoglobulin to all my severe cases, and they did remarkably well. And I still think if NICE guidelines and the psychiatric lobby and PACE and everything hadn't dominated research, there would have been more research to justify the use of immunoglobulin. Okay, next. Sorry, just go back. And for the people who don't believe in ME, I think to see a very, very severe case of ME is almost the final proof that it's real. You can subject people to horrendous psychological stress. You can put them in Auschwitz and threaten them with gas chambers. They don't develop ME. If you see someone with severe ME who hasn't been subjected to that stress, for me that's almost the kind of final proof. Next. How are we doing for time, Jeremy?
5 minutes.
Okay. This is for doctors who are threatened by severe cases. We'll leave that and move on. Oh yeah, can we go? Is that the first one or the second one?
Yeah, it's the first one.
Yeah. I did a study on 49 consecutive patients, and I rather like these slides, and I think I offer them to you as quite an optimistic view for children with ME. These were 49 consecutive children. You all know the concept of percentage severity. 100% is normal, 0% is dead. And of the 49 followed up over 6 years, these are the lucky ones. A third, about 15, 16, made a pretty convincing recovery. They got back to 90 to 95%. I'm not saying they weren't at risk of relapse, but life was good. So a third of children with moderately severe ME, all down here, made a good recovery within 4 or 5 years. Next. 7 were unlucky and ended up severe at the end of that period. You'll all be familiar with cases like that. And the large majority went around. This was one of the severe cases that was tube fed and had immunoglobulin, but ended up making a very good recovery. So I think that's reasonably hopeful. CMO's report should have been the last word. It's semi-official, although doctors are getting more and more disbelieving. I'm telling doctors not to feel guilty if their patients don't get better. Next. And I'm trying to convince doctors that instead of feeling guilty, they can't do anything for them. Patients are incredibly grateful for the kind of support that I've mentioned. I've never had so many Christmas cards as from any other condition other than ME, and I didn't have a cure for them. So I'm trying to encourage GPs to take on the role of really supporting this. And one thing they can do is to actually want to see you regularly, rather than you have to see them. And as a consultant, I used to bring people back to outpatients. I didn't pretend I had a cure for them, but to keep seeing them is a form of support. I think we probably haven't time for horror story, have we, Joan?
Go on, yeah. Please. Yeah.
This girl's name has been changed. Beautiful lass. Was in perfect health, and she was in the prime of life, and she was all set to play the lead role in The Sound of Music in a production that November. And she came down with the virus and went woof. And she was under a paediatrician who was quite nice to people with ME, and the charities already recommended. But she had to be hospitalised because she needed nursing care, and she was kind of taken out of his care and managed by a team. Right, in the hospital, the team gave her graded exercise. She was treated as a fake. The nurses wouldn't feed her, and she'd often be found with food dribbling down her thing. They had weekly meetings she had to attend in her wheelchair with her head sagging, where they set a target for her to achieve next week. The mother was restricted from visiting till 4 p.m. to let the physio have a free hand with her. She'd often come in and find her sobbing. And next, she got steadily worse, surprise, surprise. The graded exercise and the multidisciplinary teams did not make her better. And the nice paediatrician actually said, "We're not doing much for you, why don't you take her home?" So she did, but the nurse made them say it was against medical advice and mother signed. And then a rather frightening lady GP came to visit and insisted on talking to her on her own without her mother, reducing her to tears time after time. And then she finally says she can't accept responsibility. She tells social workers, "I can't accept responsibility for her." And the social workers, instead of just taking her back into hospital, they get the police and they take her in as a case of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. I don't know why they had to say it was that, but they didn't believe she was ill. So she was put under a court order. They were then going to put her in foster care for 6 months to show she'd get better away from her mother. And I was called in by her guardian ad litem. And I came in and found her sobbing, sitting alone, pale, wan, defeated, resigned to going into foster care. And I tried to say she had a right to be heard and her guardian should listen to her. And I gradually pepped her up, and she eventually, as I left, she asked the nurse to get her the phone. She wanted to phone her guardian, and she got her guardian, and I did my report. Guardian came out in favour. She was allowed to return home. She ended up making a total recovery. But it was absolutely appalling the way the nurses treated her. They didn't believe her, and they'd write in the notes, "Mother comes, draws the curtains around her, and she bursts into tears," as if it was her mother making her burst into tears, rather than she was brave until her mother came. It was a happy ending in the end, but that came very near to separation. Next. Oh yeah. when she cried when her mother visited, the social worker said we'll stop mother's visits altogether. And when I asked, a good thing with adolescents is to say, pretend I'm your fairy godmother and I can give you 3 wishes. And that she was so defeated, her only wish was, could she possibly see her mother without the social worker there on her birthday next week? And I said, I think you can have better wishes than that. Tiffany lifts up the stakes. Let's ask for getting home. There's a terrible girl in Enniskillen I could just tell you about, but we haven't time. Next, let's just probably finish. I've often said a good GP is better than a bad consultant. And GPs have a difficult time defending their patients if other people get it wrong because they've got higher status. Next, that's my second severe case, acting as a bridesmaid. 2 years tube fed, severely ill, and made a total recovery after immunoglobulin. Next. That's my Northern Ireland case before. She did an aerobathon while incubating flu. It was the most severe case I've ever seen. There are many more dots on this map since, but these are, sorry, the map's wrong, but the yellow dots are ones where I've given second opinions, and the red dots are where there were child protection proceedings. Next. That's it. Thanks very much.
And down to where that was laid on the front, please. Nigel, thanks very much. That was very, very moving.